here you have literally the United States throwing pieces of bread at Palestinians that are being mass murdered and genocided because of U.S. foreign policy, supposedly building a port in the midst of a worse siege than prior to October 7th. And then you have Russia and China actually building things, and not just infrastructurally. I know you talk a lot about the infrastructure, and that's super important. Maybe you can close on some of that, but also politically, you had Russia meeting with the main Palestinian resistance groups,
yes,
bringing them to Moscow, talking about a unity government, talking about, well, what is the way forward here for Palestine? You have China saying Palestine has the right to resist. Look at the UN Charter. It has the right to armed resistance. And you have both of these countries actually providing political and diplomatic alternatives, ones that, as you said, don't subscribe to forever wars. Actually, they subscribe to no wars, but cooperation and solidarity. There's no point to wars in the midst of a global majority that all have the same needs. So Pepe, I'll leave you to close. I know that you have a short time today, so I'll leave you to close.
I'm glad that you reminded us of the port. You know that there was a port in Gaza. It was destroyed by Israel, by the way. They had a port, and what the Americans are going to build, it's an affront, in fact, because it's trying to change the subject once again of the genocide, which keeps going. Just like they have their aid drop, which is a pittance compared to the real needs of the starving Palestinian population. Same thing in the European Union. That thing, that toxic Medusa, which is going to be bureaucratically reelected for a second mandate at the European Commission. The European Commission facilitated 50 billion euros of help, aid, weaponizing, etc., to Ukraine. And they are giving what? 25 million, not more than that, to Gaza. It's a joke. It's like a PR thing that lasts 1 minute, and then everybody forgets. It's we have to feel very, very, all of us who are following this thing closely, or from the inside, or near the margins, and trying to analyze it, that we have to be sad, appalled, extremely disgusted, and it's very hard not to be contaminated with this. So the only way I think we cannot be dragged into the mud, the deep, dark mud of what Western values is, making us plunge into it, is to look at the possibilities, the auspicious possibilities ahead. It's something that when I go back to Asia, it's great, because on the first day that you're back to Asia, you renew with it. You renew with the Tao, you renew with Buddhism. You start looking at life and change in a very positive way. When you are in the West, or even here, which is a bridge between East and West, the pressure from the dark side is so strong, it's so overwhelming, that we, if we are not strong enough, we despair, and we say, look, they can get away with it, and they always can get away with it. And the most striking example nowadays is the genocide. After ICJ, after everything ruling, blah, 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 nothing has changed. And they are planning a double down of the genocide if this Rafah massacre takes place. And they know they can get away with it. They get away with it from all across NATO stand, from the US to Europe. It's very, very sad. And of course, all the excuses that NATO and collective West and the European capitals are making nowadays to change the subject on the war that they are losing. It's not that they're finding a way out. They are trying to stall it, assuming that there's going to be some magic funds in dollars and euros that are coming later, which will translate into weapons, which will translate into weapons getting to depleted Ukrainian forces, and they can turn the game around. No, it's not going to happen. First of all, because basically this is a money laundering, a weapon money laundering operation. Most of the money, as we all know, stays in the US, goes to the industrial military complex, what our friend Ray McCommon called the Missimat. And the Missimat, now they're desperate because you have their academia think tank branch trying to come up with new narratives to justify the gigantic fiasco. And in the middle of that, you see the biggest rat of them all leaving the sinking ship, which is there's something that is not exactly clear, because the biggest rat of them all, invisible and not inside the State Department, which she actually run, because little Blinky is a wimp. Now she's going to be in the shade. She can be even more dangerous, just like hubby. Don't forget that hubby, Robert Kagan, is always in the shade. And he's still conceptualizing, and he's still neocon strategizing in the shade, which is something that maybe she can do side by side with hubby. And that can be even more dangerous, in fact. So this thing is not over. It's not over at all. And we have to be very, very careful to there. Don't forget that the neocons are specialists in losing wars. And this will be the biggest loss of them all. So they need to come up with some sort of a strategy in the end to at least taste what it means to win. And that's why and how they can become even more dangerous. So we cannot let our guard down. And I'm sure the Russians are not letting their guard down. On the contrary, Patrushev, Narishkin, they know everything that is going on. They are on a wait and see position. They know that something drastic could happen this year before the American elections, or even in the next few months. And they know that after, depending on what happens in the American election, next year is going to be much easier, let's say geopolitically, for Russia. It will become much harder geopolitically for China, depending on who wins the elections. But in terms of the black soil of Novorossiya, we can have an end game in the first part of 2025, practically for sure. And then these neocons who will be thrown once again in dustbin of history, what will be their last shot? We still don't know yet. It could be something extremely hardcore. So we have to be prepared for all these possibilities. So it's really, who could imagine that the 21st century would be something like this? I wish the great old Eric Hobsbawm was alive. And we could talk to him about the young warmongering end of times 21st century.
Yeah, no, that's certainly where things are going. Pepe, it was great to be with you today. Thanks for taking your time live from Moscow. Everyone, be sure to go to the video description to find where you can find him on Twitter and Telegram. Pepe, I'll be back in touch with you, especially as things develop. So take good care now.
Oof. Thanks very much, Danny. Thanks very much, everybody. And the struggle goes on, and be alert, all of you. Cheers. Bye-bye. Greetings from Moscow.
Bye-bye. I just wanted to comment a bit further, just to add to what Pepe was saying about where things are going. And he closed with the Victoria Nuland departure. And the point I think is very clear. Victoria Nuland's ouster is certainly not the end of Victoria Nuland's and people like her, their project, the Neocon project. That is continuing. And even Victoria Nuland herself could find her way within the revolving door to a very snug position within the foreign policy establishment. And what comes next remains to be seen. But it is indeed clear that the roadmap has been laid by this foreign policy establishment. As we were talking, and as we have spoken so many times before about the hope that this multipolar world is bringing, the fact that Russia, that China are connecting the world, connecting the global majority in ways that were not even possible, let's say, during the Cold War, because of the various ways in which the emerging powers, countries like Russia, so the Soviet Union at the time, and China were isolated and were relatively still destitute in many different ways, despite their progress made during that time, during the Cold War. Because of that relative destitution in the global majority, the global South, there weren't ways possible to connect nations, to connect people like there are now. And Russia and China are leading the way toward that peaceful development at a higher level scale, at a more value added scale that is just unprecedented. And that means that this roadmap that the neocon foreign policy establishment, this imperial foreign policy establishment led by the United States and the NATO stand countries have laid, is that there are flashpoints everywhere from Ukraine. It is no coincidence that as Russia stabilizes, as China grows, as China emerges from this global economic crisis as a stable partner, not one without problems, but a stable partner of the global majority. Russia, the same way. Russia has many challenges. This de-dollarization process has many obstacles in the way, but their stability and their progress that has already been made, their forward moving trajectory, that is the real threat here. And that is why it is very possible that as 2024 continues to move ahead into an election season, and those election seasons in the United States tend to be explosive, they won't be in Russia. In China, leadership is stable. In Russia, leadership is stable. However, you want to think about that with your prejudices, Cold War kind of thinking, it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, in the final analysis, the leadership is stable. In the United States, it is not. And that means, if you think that's a positive thing, you have another thing coming, because unstable leadership, volatile leadership, leadership that is beholden to a singular agenda, no matter who ends up winning the day, ultimately means that whether it's the massacre occurring in Gaza, this regional war that could explode at any time in the Middle East, whether it is in Ukraine with NATO in Europe now taking the mantle as the primary attack dogs, especially politically and ideologically, in this Ukraine conflict, as the US tries to navigate war fatigue while maintaining their agenda. What better way than to once again use Europe as the buffer, as the dog at the end of the chain that can bark the loudest? Whether it is this constant buildup in the Asia Pacific against China, this economic warfare that continues to escalate. There is no shortage of propaganda still of a collapse theory, a collapse in China. All of this lays the pathway for options on the table when it comes to the neocon foreign policy establishment. None of these options end well for it, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it ends well for the neocon foreign policy establishment. They know that their paymasters will ultimately survive any kind of major conflict that they start in, that as long as it's profitable, as long as it moves the needle toward their ultimate end game of a major power confrontation, that this ultimately is worth it. What did Madeleine Albright say when over 500,000 Iraqis, many of them children, were starved. All of them were children. Actually, I think it was 500,000 Iraqi children were starved by U.S. sanctions on Iraq in the mid-1990s at the end of the 20th century. She said it was worth it. This is how the neocons think. They believe that blowing up the world and setting it on fire will ultimately be worth it because it will bring in the profits. It will help the weapons manufacturers. It will increase the investments that are made by the big banks in war. It will ultimately help this global oligarchy, this class of elites who ultimately benefit from war. But the problem is that sooner and closer, what happens is that nuclear war becomes an actual possibility. And that is true on all of these flashpoints, whether it is the fact that Israel has nuclear weapons, that they indeed could trigger a major regional conflict, which then would drag in nuclear powers themselves, especially from the multipolar world, into a major conflict. This almost happened in Syria during the dirty war that continues and is ongoing on Syria, led by the United States and NATO. And of course, when it comes to Ukraine and Eastern Europe and the Eurasian theater, this is very much true. This is very much true in US and NATO provocations toward Russia as well as China. So that is ultimately the end game here. And that is why we speak so much about the alternative, what is being built, the Belt and Road Initiative, BRICS, the Eurasian Economic Union, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. That is why it is so valuable to talk and discuss these developments, because they are what is ultimately keeping this world, if there's any semblance of stability, if there's any hope for progress, if there's any progress at all occurring, it is happening on that side of the world, on the side of the world which is fast becoming the principal world order overall, objectively and generally. That is why it's so important to understand Gaza in this context, that it is important to understand that unless the multipolar world is strengthened and wins the day, there will be huge consequences. And the point is that as the multipolar world progresses, as Russia, as China, as Iran, as Yemen, as all of these countries that are in some way or another resisting the empire, continue to move forward in their projects, in their development, in their steadfast resistance, the more that the empire will become belligerent. Some are calling it hyper imperialism. I'm not calling it that. I am calling it a belligerent empire in decline, one that is increasingly dangerous. And in any of these flashpoints that have been covered here so extensively, any of these flashpoints could be the stage in which this ultimate endgame for the neocon foreign policy establishment is triggered, the spark is lit, and the explosion will be one that like we've never seen. And that is saying something, given that we are right now witnessing just a horrific rolling war crime and genocide in Gaza, as well as the huge consequences born from the other wars that we cover right here on this channel. And it could be somewhere else. You don't know. That's the unpredictable character of a predictably declining empire. And so it's going to be important here moving forward to continue to cover these developments and connect them all together, as the trilogy of hope that Pepe Escobar wrote about: multipolar Moscow, China, de-dollarization, all of this. That is why it's important to not just uphold and inform about these developments, but to become active participants through defending it, through taking up the mantle, building bridges, building ties, solidarity, becoming more global minded in nature. That is why it's so important to do so, and to ensure that this process has friends right here in the collective West. Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support.
This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.